So here to make sense of what is going on is CBS News political director John Dickerson and our campaign guru / poet laureate, Major Garrett. And John, you're in Des Moines, Iowa. Major is actually already in Manchester, New Hampshire. But let's talk about what happened last night. And I want to start with you, John. We got to talk about maybe the first declared winner, which is Ted Cruz. Tell me who came out, what did he do right? Who were his supporters that helped him lock in this win?
Well, you know, it looked like this was going to be another instance in which Donald Trump upended the traditional rules of politics, that he had big rallies and didn't organize Iowa, which is supposed to be an organizational state, and that he would prevail. Well, it turned out that the old rules of Iowa held. Ted Cruz pitched himself to evangelical voters, to very conservative voters, using a state-of-the-art turnout operation. And that won the day for him. And it was a massive turnout, a record-setting turnout. Close to 180,000 people turn out, which blew the doors off the last time for Republicans. And Cruz won, again, among strong conservatives and evangelical voters. He won with traditional Republican voters who his team had courted assiduously. And then the other, of course, big story is that Marco Rubio came up and did much better at third place than he was expected to.
Major, let's talk about Rubio for a second, because the numbers show that Cruz won 28%. Then you've got Trump at 24%, but Marco Rubio at 23%. It's basically a second place finish for him. So what does that mean going forward?
Well, it means he arrives here in New Hampshire with substantial momentum, and he begins to present to the Republican Party the following case. Look what I did in Iowa. I told you I would close strong. There was a huge surge. Many of the late deciders broke my way, and many of the people in the entrance polls said when they were thinking about November, who would be the best and strongest nominee for the Republican Party, they in large measure broke for Rubio. His case here in New Hampshire will be, if you're looking for an alternative to Ted Cruz or Donald Trump, it's not Jeb Bush, it's not Chris Christie, it's not John Kasich, all of whom will compete aggressively against Marco Rubio here. Rubio's campaign will say, this is the ticket to punch. This is the candidate to back and to consolidate around to begin the process of taking on Cruz and Trump as the pragmatic alternative, if you will, for Republicans who are looking for that, if in fact they are. And New Hampshire will be a very good case to test that proposition. Why? Because Republicans here tend to be a bit more moderate. Independents tend to participate in the process here in the primary. They can re-register as Republicans on the day of the primary and leading up to it. So if Rubio can catch fire and become that pragmatic or mainstream alternative and do well here in New Hampshire, that gives him momentum for South Carolina, and it would be very bad news for Bush, Christie, and Kasich, because for all three of them, it's essentially beat expectations, beat them dramatically in New Hampshire, and if you don't, your campaign is likely over.
We got to talk about Donald Trump. Here's a candidate whose branding was all about being a winner, so much so that, you know, he didn't show up for the last debate. He actually left Iowa briefly, went to New Hampshire and came back. You know, things that other people would consider major missteps, and it seemed like none of that was going to affect him. But lo and behold, here we are with when the votes are counted, and he's in second place, almost in third place. John, do you think you know, skipping the debate and those sort of moves were maybe a misstep on Trump's part?
It's hard to say what hurt him, certainly with his core supporters missing the debate and choosing to have his counter operation showed the kind of strength that they like in him. I think that basically Ted Cruz outperformed him. You know, and there are areas where Donald Trump, though, did well. He did better with evangelical voters than you might have guessed. Mm-hmm. He did better with evangelical voters, say, than Mitt Romney did in both 08 and 12. He did better with those who say they are somewhat conservative than Ted Cruz did. Ted Cruz won the very conservative. Trump won that next category. He did bring a lot of people out to vote. And those are those new voters, people who, some of whom were switching over from registering as Democrats. So it's unclear which move would have maybe helped with a percentage point or two. There is another alternative theory, which is that what we perhaps saw in Iowa is the Trump ceiling, which is that he can't get above a certain amount, but has benefited from a split field. And one of the interesting things about what Major is talking about is if Marco Rubio does emerge as the mainstream alternative to Ted Cruz and to Donald Trump, then, and those others fall away, Kasich, Bush, and Christie, then if there's a ceiling on Trump's vote, then Marco Rubio maybe does better, and we start to see Trump have more problems.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the difference between Iowa voters and New Hampshire. We know in New Hampshire, Major, Trump is up in double digits. But when it comes to Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, who has a better shot of, continuing on with this momentum?
Well, it's a question of organization, and Ted Cruz does have a formidable organization here, but he doesn't have the natural allies among Republican voters that he did in Iowa. Iowa was the very best place for Ted Cruz to launch this mobilization effort, work on it week by week, and actually turn the vote out, which is precisely what he did. It'll be more of a challenge here in New Hampshire. The Cruz campaign knows that and doesn't set for itself super high expectations here in New Hampshire. Its next big contest is South Carolina, where the voting base among Republicans is much more conservative, much more amenable to the Cruz message about deeply conservative, social conservative, religiously conservative approach to politics. But I want to stop for a moment and talk about Donald Trump for just a second. Remember, that record-shattering turnout that John described, 182,000 Republicans, that's 62,000 more than turned out 4 years, and that was the previous record. Donald Trump, this morning, is the Republican who, except for Ted Cruz, has received the most votes of any Republican who's ever run in an Iowa caucus. That is a significant accomplishment for a first-time and very non-conventional politician. Was it enough? No, it wasn't. But it wasn't nothing. Donald Trump did not fail abjectly in Iowa. He fell a bit short to a super organized, highly motivated, and campaign that was, I think, better than any campaign we have ever seen at identifying and mobilizing voters. So what does Trump have to do? He has to learn some lessons about what he did well in Iowa and what he might have done better and bring them to New Hampshire. He has had an untouchable lead in the double digits for months here. But if he falters here and comes in second to Marco Rubio or even Ted Cruz, though the Cruz campaign is not in any way, shape, advertising the possibility of a first here, then his campaign will have serious problems. But Trump has a lead here, and he did well in Iowa. That proves he is a political force, and that political force will get another chance to make sure that voters here understand what the stakes are and rally behind him. And if he does win a victory here in New Hampshire, his campaign, I think, will not be completely rebalanced. It will have significant momentum heading to South Carolina, which, by the way, is a place where Trump also has had a formidable lead for a good long while.
You know, Meg asked about the difference between New Hampshire and Iowa voters. It's also a different process, caucus versus primary. And in the caucus environment, you talk to your neighbors, they might argue, they might change your mind. I'm wondering if either of you feel that any particular candidate would benefit or be harmed by this different process, this vote where it's private and, you don't necessarily argue with your neighbors about who would be a better leader. I'll ask John.
Well, this goes to the point I was just making about Trump, which is in a caucus environment, a challenging one. He turned a lot of people out, and a lot of first-time caucus goers came there for Donald Trump. A primary is a much more open, all-day-long process. I've been to many rallies here in New Hampshire where people have stood in line outside in temperatures 6 degrees and lower for hours to see Trump. So that does suggest there is an opportunity for Trump here to take those people, rally them to a primary, which is an all-day process. It's not as complicated, it's not as time-consuming as a caucus, and do very well here.
And John, let's talk about the Democrats, because this was a razor-thin victory for Hillary Clinton. Months and months ago, people thought this was going to be Clinton's coronation, and here comes Bernie Sanders, and basically a virtual tie. So, just break it down for us. What happened?
Well, Sanders was able to harness that enthusiasm that we've been reporting on for so many months. He was not able to harness enough of it, obviously, to win. But also, by fighting it to a draw, or actually Hillary Clinton has been declared the winner, She kept off a challenge in a state where Bernie Sanders, if he was going to have the kind of campaign that he has promised, which is to say a political revolution, it was going to need to have a big spark in Iowa, because Iowa is the state of all of them, arguably, where he has the best chance. There are the most liberals as a share of the vote. He has strength in New Hampshire, but that may in part be because he's from a neighboring state. And so the Sanders model is that he begins strong in Iowa and starts to have a kind of brush fire that was going to carry him on through the later states, which are less liberal and where Clinton has a very strong organization and he has a less strong one. So looking at the Sanders vote, it was incredibly impressive from where he started. It was impressive because he went up against a Clinton organization that was far stronger this time around than it was in 2008. But he did not bring out voters at the same level, new voters, young voters, in the way that Barack Obama did in 2008. Now, Barack Obama was a once-in-a-generation talent who met his moment. So that's a super high bar. But that's the kind of bar that Sanders had to get a little closer to or clear if he was going to create this massive rolling momentum that is the kind of theory of his campaign.
All right, John Dickerson in Iowa, Major Garrett in New Hampshire. Thank you so much, gentlemen.